is passing through.
So, what you want to repeat some of that? What you talked to me about?
Yeah, no. All we were talking about earlier was that years ago, in fact, one of the main catalytic agents that caused the Wyndham Recovery Community Center to open was a series of articles in the Hartford paper called Heroin Town, and because Willimantic was sort of on the corridor between New York and Boston, where people would stop off, the heroin trade in between New York and Boston, and so it was easy. There was plenty of heroin available, and so this became the sort of repository in the quiet corner of Connecticut where there was all this heroin available, and all these overdose deaths, and this big addiction problem, and all that stuff. And as a result, during that period, when the attention was drawn to it, that every service provider and their cousin set up shop here in Willimantic. So there was this enormous recovery footprint that was laid back then. We're talking like 2004, 2000, in the early 2000s. And as a result, while a bunch of other areas in these failed industrial cities, there's so many of them in New England, were impacted so heavily by this recent round of fentanyl-laced opioid epidemic thing, that Willimantic withstood it better, not that it did it really well, but withstood it better than a lot of other communities because of this community recovery footprint that was already in place here in town, whereas a lot of other places were playing sort of catch-up, trying to get the infrastructure in place that already existed here.
But there was also a culture that also resulted in a cultural recovery. Do you not think so? Or?
Oh, I do think so. I mean, I think that there's been a strong recovery presence in this town for better than 10 years. Probably closer to 20 years, and that there's a very strong recovery community in town. I mean, if you take a look at the people who are the sort of pillars of the recovery community here, a lot of them have 20, 30 years in recovery, and they look after the newer folks. They try and shepherd people through, and they're a good resource for like what to do and if you've been in a situation before. But beyond that, and I think that we're finding now more with this latest sort of group of people who are addicted to opioids, that there are a bunch of other service providers in terms of being able to get one-on-one and or group therapy and or medication supported recovery and any of these other groups, that Willimantic has a really strong presence. Plus there are a whole bunch of community-based organizations that are here to support people's other needs in terms of recovery capital, whether it be housing or food or clothing or whatever it is, that all those things are available here in town, as well as state and federal offices such as like DSS and the American Job Center, which used to be Connecticut Department of Labor, and the Access Agency and all these other places that can help come together to help to support a person get what they need, get their needs met, aside from simply remaining in recovery from substance use disorder. Because it's much more challenging to remain in recovery from substance use disorder if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, if you don't have a safe place to live, if you don't have access to employment or transportation. So there are a bunch of different organizations that come together within the community to try and support people's efforts, to have a life filled with meaning and purpose.
Okay, and how long have you been here?
I've been here just going on 2 years. I started here in July of 2016. The thing that I came here as a result of being a volunteer at CCAR's Hartford Recovery Center, and as a result of volunteering there, it became clear to me that I was absolutely in love with what CCAR was doing with their approach toward people, treating them as resources as opposed to objects, asking people what they wanted instead of telling them what they must do. Because as a person in recovery myself, I could never stand being told what to do. So I completely identify with that whole approach.
Okay, and what's going on today at the center?
Well, let's see. So it's Wednesday. We have an all recovery meeting, which is open to anybody struggling with any sort of addiction issue, whether it's process or substance, any allies of the recovery community, friends, family members alike. That meeting takes place every day, Monday to Friday at 12:30. That's 12:30 to 1:30. We've got a little documentary day thing, it being Wednesday after that, and actually this evening we're doing dinner and a movie. We've taken on, there are no 12-step meetings in town here in Willimantic on Wednesday nights, so we've taken one Wednesday night a month to do a social event. So tonight we're going to be showing the film Moonstruck with Cher and Nicolas Cage, and serving chicken parm. So it's dinner and a movie tonight at 7 o'clock. And that's essentially our thing for today. We have a number of telephone recovery support calls that need to get made. And so we're just going to kind of take it from there.
What is a telephone recovery support?
Okay, so telephone recovery support is one of the programs that CCAR runs. We actually run it for the state of Connecticut, for the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. It's a free program that's open to anyone who wants to get the calls. It's completely voluntary, and it's completely confidential. And between the three CCAR centers, we call about 450 people a week to offer them encouragement and support in their recovery, to give them information about resources if they need help with access to either a higher level of care or with building recovery capital, like housing, shelter, food, other resources that are available in their communities, and that kind of thing.
Has your job gotten harder or less hard in the last couple of years with the budget cuts in the other state programs and so many of the state programs?
Well, CCAR has actually been relatively blessed in terms of being protected from a lot of those cuts because of the whole sort of opioid epidemic crisis thing that's going on, and the fact that we've got a program that puts recovery coaches in the emergency departments at now going on 10 hospitals. So we've been very lucky, and so I don't think that the budget has affected us so much as it's affected some of our community in terms of not having access to resources. For instance, there was a program, a federally funded program called Access to Recovery, that provided funding for work-related stuff, job-related stuff, whether it was car repair, whether it was tools or uniforms or whatever it was, for people to get further into the workforce, and that program ended because of the funding ran out. So that was an issue. The other thing that I can say is that we did lose funding from our recovery housing project, which was like a really important project for us because it was letting people who own sober living houses voluntarily be inspected and certified, so that people knew when they were getting involved in getting a loved one or themselves into a sober living environment that it was going to be a credible, safe place with programming where there was some structure involved, so that people weren't just basically left to their own devices. So at this point, it's kind of like the Wild West out there when it comes to sober houses. So if you have a friend or a loved one or you're looking to get into a safe, sober house, that there's really no way of knowing what a good place is and what a place that isn't so good is, except for word of mouth, which is not incredibly trustworthy. So that's sort of problematic for us.
So the recovery centers are in Bridgeport, Hartford, and
here in Willimantic, yeah.
Okay, and in the past they were all kind of notorious for having drug problems. Do you think that the recovery centers have had an impact in the other two cities, or are they much too big?
Oh, well, I'm not really sure. I mean, I know that Bridgeport, the recovery center in Bridgeport is a vital, vibrant. They see probably twice as many people in that center as we see here. They do a tremendous amount of stuff that's community oriented, and the guy who's the staff down there, Mike Askew and Liz Torres, they're terrific, and they're very, very involved in the community, and Mike is involved statewide in a number of different things. Now, that being said, Bridgeport is a big city, and there's a lot going on down there, so whether the impact they have there is I think it's significant for the people who are involved. I think they could have a much wider reach if they had better funding. But the Bridgeport Center is moving into a bigger space. I think they have aspirations for doing a lot more. And knowing Mike and Liz, I know that they're going to do their level best to get the word out to as many people as they can and to try and support as many people as they can. The Hartford Center is... They see about as many people as we see, even though it's a bigger center, because Hartford is a funny city because it's very sort of regionalized into neighborhoods and stuff like that. So it takes a lot of just being sort of an ambassador from one neighborhood to the next. And there are a number of people who do outreach on behalf of the Hartford Center and on behalf of CCAR in general. Tyrone, who's one of the guys, who's one of the volunteers up there, has been doing outreach for CCAR for years now. I mean, he goes out to, I can't tell you how many places he visits on a weekly basis. He does a terrific job. So, there are a lot of things that the the Hartford Center does in terms of program that's really, really fascinating and interesting. And I feel for them the same way as I feel for us here in Wyndham that, there are so many people in that area that could take advantage of all the stuff that we offer. And it's all a question of how to get the information to the right people so they can come in here and take advantage of the resources that we offer.
Okay.
Talk a little bit about the Willimantic Hope program that's just starting this week.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
So Willimantic is modeling a program. The Willimantic Police Department, I should say, is modeling a program that's been rolled out in several other municipalities, including Manchester, Connecticut, called the Hope Program, which is it's like an arrest diversion program, more or less, where if the PD encounters someone who has clearly got a substance use related issue and they haven't committed any kind of a serious sort of violent crime that someone needs to be arrested and incarcerated for, they'll offer them the option of going to the hospital, and they'll give them a package of resources if the hospital is not an option for them, a package of resources including information about the CCAR Recovery Center, information about local 12-step meetings, information about other local service providers that might help them get their needs met so that they're not in that situation again, so that they don't find themselves in this revolving door business of arrest, arraignment, back into use, back to arrest, back to arraignment, back to, and then we see the same thing with treatment, which is one of the reasons why our emergency department recovery coach program is in effect and is so successful, because it's helping to try and break the cycle of people using the emergency department as their primary care physician. So it's use, overdose, or substance use related medical complication followed by trip to the emergency room, trip to detox, trip to treatment, out of treatment, back into active use, back into the system again, back into the emergency room, back into detox, back into treatment, so it's usually treatment or incarceration. So that we're hoping to intervene in that cycle first by going into the emergency department when people are offered the opportunity to speak to a recovery coach, when someone's appropriate to talk to one of our coaches, to offer them the option of trying something different than what they've been doing in hopes of breaking that cycle so that they're not constantly caught in that sort of merry-go-round of detox to treatment to the street to try and establish some sort of recovery capital that people might be able to get a little traction. So the same way in trying to break the cycle of incarceration. So we're hopefully, that program is rolling out this week. We have very high hopes for it. A very close friend and a big supporter of CCAR is Lieutenant Solak of the Willimantic Police Force, and he's been instrumental in getting this thing up and running. And we're helping provide them with materials and whatnot based on some of the experience we have with other programs in other states that are giving out packets of resource materials that they're not only going to offer this to people that they encounter on the street, but they're going to be putting it in with their property when they're leaving incarceration, when they're leaving the jail in town. So hopefully, armed with that information, people will be more informed about choices they can make to help to break that cycle.
So besides the nonprofit community that set up early, like 15, 20 years ago, you feel like the government support has been kind of unusual for a town like this?
Well, Willimantic they have a really, really strong community care team, and what they try and do is they bring a number of different providers, town-funded, state-funded, government-funded, for-profit, the whole 9 yards together, who serve the same community. And we're talking about the homeless community, the people with mental health challenges, the people with substance use challenges in the community, to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks. So you have people from the town, the Wyndham Area No Freeze Shelter, the social workers from Wyndham Area Interfaith Ministries, from the Wyndham Recovery Community Coalition, the CCAR, obviously, Perception Program, CHR, the Connecticut Department of Labor, which is now called, what's it called now? American Job Centers.
Yes.
They change the name so often
Right.
I lose track. But yeah, so that's a monthly meeting where people get together, and really the resources that are provided to people in this town are really much, much better and much more robust than a lot of other larger towns.
Just a personal question. What do you think the relationship is to the housing authority? Do you feel like the housing that the housing authority provides is fairly safe for people that are in recovery?
Well, I think that the Willimantic Housing Authority does a fine job in working with the no freeze shelter and with the population to try and get people prioritized in terms of getting them into housing. A lot of it, however, is that there's an ethical thing with people who are formerly homeless who get housing, who they feel obligated to invite the people who they've been living with as homeless previously into their homes. And there's a big problem with that, in that A, they're in violation of their housing voucher, the agreement, and B, it's virtually impossible once someone establishes themselves in your home to throw them out. So people come in, they're bad actors, they're not doing the right thing, they draw attention to you, your housing situation becomes jeopardized because of the fact that you're trying to do something nice. It's like a no good deed goes unpunished thing. And I find that to be, the housing authority can only do so much in terms of like making your place to live safe. You have a lot to do with that yourself. So it's problematic for people, and I think that maybe they don't go into enough detail when someone is awarded a housing voucher to let them know what the rules of the road are and where their potential exposure is and how dangerous it can be, out of the goodness of your heart to invite somebody into your place, because if they decide that they don't want to leave, it's very, very difficult to get involved, get them out of there, and it's the last thing that the police department wants to get involved. The police department doesn't want to get involved in any kind of domestic thing, because it's always he said, she said kind of situation, and chances are the person who calls them is going to wind up dropping the charges, and they're going to wind up generating a lot of paperwork and going through a lot of trouble for nothing. The same thing goes with the whole business of the homeless camping thing, which is something that just blows my mind about the local community, because you have, technically, it's illegal to camp within the city of Willimantic, but you have a homeless population that has no place to go. So everyone is aware of the fact that these people are camping, and the police are trying their best to turn a blind eye to it until they need to be involved, but invariably they need to be involved. So they're the ones who are stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I wish, in my heart of hearts, I wish that the city would be a little bit more proactive in terms of establishing a location where people can legally camp, and maybe giving them access to toilet facilities and water, and that kind of thing, instead of leaving them in a situation where they know they're living in someplace where they're not allowed to be constantly, and they're always this far away from being thrown out and or given $92 tickets that they can't pay, and or having the police called on them. And the police, believe me, I have a number of friends who are involved in the law enforcement community in town here, and it's the last thing they want to be involved in. But these people are trespassing, and invariably there's somebody who's going to do something that is going to wind up getting law enforcement involved, and at that point they have no choice. So it's not a good situation for anyone.
There's a lot of nice murals around town of the old industrial Willimantic. And Willimantic, I think, was one of the first ones to try to make themselves attractive or promote themselves as artists should come here, and maybe little businesses, little creative businesses.
Yeah.
Has the tax base been restored?
No, not at all. If you going up and down Main Street, you can see the number of empty storefronts and stuff like that. One of the other things, I guess, that happened back then, 20 years ago, was that the state and local governments took up a lot of space here. So a lot of things like the community college system, like Quinnipiac Valley Community College, had a big space next to us. They're gone. And there are a bunch of other sort of financial institutions that are no longer there. If you go up and down Main Street, there are a number of empty spaces, and the town is trying to get people in. The town is trying to, turn them into artist spaces and galleries and whatnot. But it's not easy because it's a lot of space to fill. And no, I would say that no, the tax base definitely needs to be restored, and the business, the town is relatively business friendly, but the thing is that there really aren't a lot of disposable dollars running around on the street in Willimantic that are going to support these businesses. That's the problem. That being said, of course, it is a relatively progressive community. We have the co-op, we have a number of sort of relatively interesting vegan, vegetarian, quirky eateries, a number of sort of artist co-op stores like Swift Waters where they sell stuff that's produced by local artists, artisans, whatnot. The giant Third Thursday Festival hopes to attract people. The whole revitalization of the Wyndham Mills project down there, which is terrific. And they've got a couple of grants locally recently. Not locally, but federal grants recently to do some revitalization of like housing, Main Street, whatever. There's an abandoned building actually next to us here on Main Street that they just got a grant to rehab. And I'm not really sure where that stands because they put a roof on the building and walked away from it. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But, there are constantly efforts being made. The problem is that, funding streams tend to run out. You apply for a grant, you get the grant, you spend the money that you're given, the grant runs out, and then what? So that's an issue. I know that there's a sort of progressive alternative school called Path Academy up the street here, and they're having trouble now, like losing their charter, dealing with funding. There was just a big sort of community support meeting based on trying to keep them in town because they provide a lot of services for people who everybody learns in a different way, and for people who thrive better in an alternative environment, they do really well. They also offer like classes for GED for people who are like trying to get their diplomas if they missed out on that, or whatever it is, and provide a bunch of other sort of alternative learning opportunities. So we're trying to do that. There's also sort of a theater community in town, the Leave It Theater, and there's an arts magnet school up the street and stuff like that. So it is a sort of an artsy town. I like.
Well, you also have a university here, one of the main.
Right, Eastern is right up the hill, and they have a thriving community, and we have a lot of students from Center for Community Engagement who actually do work down here at the center, which is great. And they're actually, it's the most popular program that Center for Community Engagement runs. There's a waiting list to come down here and volunteer. And our volunteers last semester won the award for their volunteer work here in their group. So it was like strengthening communities or whatever, and their work here and the projects they did here in terms of vocational support and job help and just sort of interfacing with the recovery community won them an award. And honestly, I can't stress enough the value of a recovery community center providing opportunities for interface between the recovery community and the rest of the community at large, because this whole idea of bias and prejudice and stigma that people in recovery and people struggling with substance use disorder face is really only overcome by people having conversations one-on-one, face-to-face. It's so much more difficult to marginalize and to otherize and to subhumanize other people if you get to know them and look them in the eye. And a recovery community center is a great place where people have the opportunity for interactions like that to take place.
Okay. Is there anything else you want us to know about?
I can't think of anything in general, but I do know that, Lord, I wish that there was a recovery community center in every one of these failed industrial towns in the state. The other thing I was going to say is that, like so many of these other towns, you can point to any number of, like Norwich and New London and Pawcatuck and, pretty much any of these towns, Manchester, pick one, that there's nothing like that an infusion of cash wouldn't solve. There are all these beautiful old industrial buildings that can be refurbished and turned into like incredible like incubator kitchens and independent businesses and all those other things. And it really just takes people to make an investment in our own cities instead of taking their money and keeping it
Right.
hanging on to it and sit and hoarding it and hanging on to it and spending it in foreign countries or on like vacations or whatever it is. Like reinvest it in the people in the state, reinvest it in the community, because we all get better. It's like the tide that lifts all boats. If we just extend a hand and help people out and teach them a new skill, like the upside potential is tremendous.
So the other side of that is that in a lot of ways Willimantic still is the same kind of failed or left behind industrial city, and so the success that Willimantic has had in terms of decreasing their opiate deaths is all the more kind of astounding.
Well, I think that it speaks to the majority of New England. New England is peppered with, because the Industrial Revolution was 100 plus years ago.
Right.
You know, as a result, I mean, it's like we're talking almost 150 years ago. You know, as a result, you know, the economy has moved on. We're a service economy now. Like, don't fool yourself into thinking that we're a manufacturing economy, regardless of what some people want you to think. We're not. You know, so we need to find new ways to reinvent ourselves and become viable. You know, and instead of abandoning these towns and their populations, we need to find a way to like retool and retrain and reinvent ourselves. You know, I think that the reason that Willimantic's numbers, statistics look the way they do in terms of, you know, not having even a more severe impact, because look, I've lost a bunch of friends in this round of this opioid epidemic. So to tell me that like Willimantic is doing great, it's just not ringing. It's not ringing true with me. I mean, I've lost friends, numerous friends from this town, and people that I've known, and people who have helped, and people I've tried to get into treatment, all that other stuff. You know, if you lose one, it's one too many. You know, but the fact that this recovery footprint has been established in this town for so long has helped this community be a little bit more resilient in terms of the impact that this latest round of, you know, fentanyl laced, you know, Purdue Pharma handing out like candy these pills to people who get hooked on it. You know what I mean? The whole thing is just. I can't even get my head around it. I really can't. You know. But welcome to capitalism, people. You know. So I mean, yeah. I mean, sure. Willimantic does okay because of its history and because we have this footprint of recovery and we have people with experience and they know what to do and they know how to get people into the fold and keep people safer than maybe in some other places. But it's not pretty. It's not pretty any way you look at it. Yeah, we need 100 more organizations like CCAR with tons and tons of funding to help lift people up and give people the tools they need in order to, like, you know, to deal with substance use disorder and to learn how to deal with unpleasantness and trauma. And, you know, we become a very sort of unpleasantness, discomfort averse culture. You know, anything that makes us feel uncomfortable or anything that seems difficult or is going to be unpleasant or there's confrontation or conflict involved, we're taking the easiest way out all the time. We're always looking for the thing that's easy. No one wants to control what they eat anymore. It's like nobody wants people. How many people do you know who are diabetic right now who like are taking drugs when all they have to do is modify their diet because they don't want to make any changes? They want the magic pill. They want the magic solution. You know, they want the medication assisted recovery. They want, you know, it's like at some point you have to stand and deliver. You have to accept what's going on in life and find a way to process stuff that's unpleasant without turning to something that's going to kill you. You know, and that's the hard sell. That's the hard selling. You know, as a person in recovery myself, I can tell you that for me, that's the hardest part. It's like standing there and like dealing with life the way it is as opposed to the way I would have it. You know, and no, it's not always fun. It's not always pleasant, but it's so worthwhile. You know, and if you just stand there and deliver and learn what you need to learn in order to make that happen, life can be amazing. Life can be beautiful, and it's so much less complicated, you know. And this is the message that we need to deliver, and we need more people who are willing to deliver it, and we need more people who are willing to listen to it. You know, and the thing is that it takes the whole society in order to help these people get to where they want to be, you know. And it helps everyone if we just have a hand in helping. You know, if you support someone instead of keeping your foot on their neck, it's going to help you in the long run because they're going to start to pay taxes and they're going to start not to commit crime and they're going to, I mean, it's like the upside potential is tremendous and all it takes is a little bit of effort on everybody's part. So let's get on it, shall we?
Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
Drummer and the living room. I've seen you drumming up the living